leathercraft. Let's begin the process, and I'll share with you my leather crafting tips and tricks. In this video, I make some handmade leather items with minimal tools. I use a leathercraft kit. I experiment with moulding the leather and using the leather on my laser. Hi and welcome, I'm Sarah from Red Rocking Bird. First of all, I wanted to get a feel for the leather and make something practical that I can use. And what better item to make than a leather bag? So I've started off with a leather bag kit. With a kit like this, you get everything you need for the whole project, so you don't need to go out and source lots of different items that you might be unfamiliar with. The pieces and everything look lovely, and I'm really looking forward to making this. But later in the video, I do go back to having a piece of leather and cutting it and hand making it myself, so I go through that process as well. So there's lots of options available, so if you like the look of this kit, there are lots of different kits available, and I'll put the link in the description below. Any leather project that you want to do some stitching on, then you need some waxed leather thread like this. It's a really strong and thick, durable thread. As you can see, the kit comes with a lot of different pieces, and it's all set up to be step by step and easy to follow. This is vegetable tanned leather, and this is where I would also start if I wanted to buy a piece of leather and make something out of it by hand. When stitching leather, you need to use 2 needles at the same time. These are thick and strong leather needles. To work out how much thread you need for a stitch line, you need to measure along the whole stitch line and multiply that by 4. And then I add about 6 to 8 inches onto that. The wax thread needs to be securely attached to the needle, and to do this, we thread the needle and then go back and pierce the thread in the center, and then pull tight like this, and there the thread is secured. So again, we do the same on the other end, pierce the thread and pull tight. Our needles are then securely attached to both ends of the wax thread. The rougher side of the leather is the underside, and the grain of the leather is the outside layer of the leather here. You want to line up your first row of stitching, and you can use clips to hold the leather in place. You can use thimbles or finger protectors if you need to, as it really is quite tough on the fingers. The first thing you need to do is thread one needle through and then pull both threads until both sides are the same length. Hold the 2 needles together and pull. A popular stitch to use is saddle stitch. Take the needle from the front side and put it through to the back, and then you take the needle that was at the back side and you put it through the same hole and bring it through to the front and pull tight. And keep repeating the same pattern. Craftsmen that do this all the time use a stitching horse or a stitching pony to hold in place, so it makes the process a lot simpler and quicker. But as you can see, as a beginner, you don't need one of these. I'm enjoying the process, and to begin with, it does look like it's coming together quite neatly, so that's really quite pleasing. The holes align really neatly, and it's a really satisfying project to complete. As you can see, it's going to take quite a bit of time to complete, but I really like that for a project, so I can do a bit each evening while watching the TV or listening to some music. Fairly neat so far, and what I've noticed others doing is tapping these down with a little hammer to really neaten up the stitching. Once you've mastered this fairly easy technique of stitching the leather, there are so many different projects that you could complete. A little bit later in the video, I will also show you how easy it is to cut the leather, so the possibilities would definitely be endless. The trick I found is to keep neat, tidy and nice and tight with those stitches. Finishing off the wax thread is also easy. Snip off the thread till about 3 mil, take a lighter or a match, melt the thread and then press in place. Snip the thread off the needle, ready to start your next line of stitching. Brass hardware is included in lots of these kits, and it's easy to install as well. When sandwiching 2 pieces of leather together, a little bit of glue is needed to adhere them. Again, clips can be used to hold these in place. Do concentrate and follow the instructions, as I got a little carried away and I sewed this together, whereas I was supposed to sew it onto the side of the bag first. If you do make a mistake like this, really don't worry, you can just snip the threads, remove the thread and begin again. I have a pointy tool and I'm teasing the threads out. It's soon put right again, so really don't worry. Pushing the needle through multiple thicknesses can be quite tricky, so I like to have a surface in front of me that I can push down on, or a piece of wood works well for this. Making sure you keep the needle nice and straight as we go through the holes is also really important, otherwise you can pierce the leather like this and it gives quite an unattractive finish, so you need to try and avoid that. When the second thread goes through, also make sure you don't pierce through the first thread, otherwise you get a split thread and this doesn't look too attractive either. But sit back, relax and enjoy the leathercraft. Here's my very amateur attempt at making a stitching pony, but you get the idea. It stands upright, push the needle from the right side to the left, then the left needle from the left to the right and keep going. Going round corners are a little bit more tricky, but you just have to go slow and push the needle through and keep aligning the holes. I got some of the wax residue on my fingers and it can get a little sticky, so it does recommend you can wear something on your fingers to protect them. One thing I did find is you can't do the whole project in one go. It does hurt those fingers a little bit, so I found just to do an hour and a half at a time. It's much better to break the project up that way. I like this as my first leather project, as I could see the process coming together and I had all the steps laid out for me to complete. So I could learn and understand the process while completing something that I really wanted as a finished product. But I am excited to see the next steps of my leather crafting, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. My stitching is all complete and now I can add the finishing touches, adding some glue into the seam to secure it. This is an edging tool and it does exactly that. It takes off the edge of the leather, and it does this so that when we burnish the leather in a moment and we're able to create a nice edge. It's easier than you might think and super satisfying to use that edge tool. Sanding the edges makes them nice and smooth, first with the rougher side of the sandpaper and then with the finer side of the sandpaper. For the final smoothing, go in one direction. I caught the file here and made a mark, and I scuffed the leather quite a lot with my needle, so I'll see if I can buff those out later on. To burnish and smooth the edge, I have some solution and a burnishing tool, which is just a smooth piece of wood. Apparently you can burnish with water as well, so you add a little bit of water or this solution and then take a tool and smooth it out. So pressing nice and lightly. I found this took quite a bit longer than I thought it would, but you just smooth and blend nice and slowly, and this is the result that I got. You can repeat the process again until you're happy with it. I add the strap and then I'm almost ready. I just want to buff this up and see if I can get rid of those marks. I have a soft cloth and some petroleum jelly or Vaseline, and I'm just using a bit of elbow grease to try and remove those marks, and yes, they do all come up lovely, so I'm really pleased. I'm absolutely thrilled that I've made this bag. Yes, it's a kit, but it's taught me a lot along the way, and I feel confident to go in and make some more out of leather. So I have some scrap leather, a ruler and a scalpel, and I'm going to make just an addition to my doorstop. Nothing fancy just yet, but I'm just going to try something really simple. A metal ruler would be far better for this. I did used to have one with a nice groove in it, and so I will be digging that out for next time, but the scalpel is giving a lovely clean cut, and I'm really happy that I can cut the leather in this way. You can edge the leather if you wish at this stage, but I'm going to leave it raw for this simple piece. A hole can be made quite easily with a sharp tool, and I make it larger with a bradawl or a screwdriver. Adding a bit of glue and a screw. It might be best to add 2 screws to this. A simple doorstop. Now that I know I can easily cut the leather with a scalpel, I'm going to make some cute keychains. I've cut a long thin strip of leather, have a keychain, loop that in, and then mark where I want the center, and I cut a slit either side, and we can simply loop that through, and you have a really beautiful keychain just like that. For another one, I wanted to extend that plait effect, so I'm cutting 2 slits with a 1/2 centimeter gap in the middle. The gap is where it's actually still attached together, so we do exactly the same as before. Push these through, and then in the other one we push them through. I'll try and do a template for this, and I'll put it in the description below the video. Such a simple idea and a simple project, but it works so well. I take my scissors and I can cut off an angle, and it's beautiful. I love them, I really do. If I ever get my shop up and running, I'll definitely put these in there. I have some quite thick veg tan leather here that I can do some projects with. It's just a scrap of leather that hopefully you can also get hold of, some scrap leather. I have a template, and to draw around this I'm just using a sharp point and then using my scalpel to cut around. But I'm noticing as I cut round the bend, it's kind of pulling the leather up a bit. So I've noticed what quite a few people do is always do straight lines to do those curves. Then it's okay to take some sandpaper and smooth those edges a little smoother. This is going to be a headphone holder, so I just cut 2 slits to make it join together. And that's the beauty of leather. We don't always need stitches or puppers. We can create something that is just the leather like this. The edges can be finished and burnished like I did on the bag. Leather can be wet and soaked in water so that we can make it more malleable. I wanted to be able to stamp the leather, and ideally it would be really good to have a metal stamp. Leather stamps really well in that way. But I wanted to see if I could stamp a bird, and so I have these plastic birds. So I want to see if these can make an imprint in the leather. I soak the leather for about 5 minutes, and you can see it goes darker in colour and becomes quite flexible. I press it down and hit it with the end of my rolling pin, or you can put a block of wood over the top and put some clamps on. After not long at all, you can see it leaves an imprint, and if you leave it to dry, it will be permanently there. This is definitely something I'd like to experiment with more. As I showed you earlier, the scalpel cuts really well through the leather, but if you don't want to use a scalpel, there's also scissors, and I get a lovely, really good clean cut with these big textile scissors, which really weren't that expensive and that I had for my sewing projects. Something else I wanted to try was wet moulding the leather, so I have an MDF bird cut out here, and I glue this to the centre of an MDF board. I have a small scrap of the vegetable tanned leather. I've soaked it for 5 minutes, dried it off just briefly, and I'm going to try and push this and force this over the top of the MDF as a mould. So to begin with, all you need to do is use your fingers, and the idea is to stretch that leather down over the mould. I could have had a mould that was a little bit deeper, but I thought I'd try this to begin with. Here I just have the back of a pen, and I'm using this to push down and mould the bird in shape, and it's working really well. The only thing I should have done is given myself a little bit more leather so that I have a bit more space to move with, as it's a little bit close to the tail there. As I cut this MDF bird out myself, I do actually have the other piece of MDF, so I can put this over as a template, but don't worry if you don't have one of those. At this point you would set this aside and let it dry fully, but of course I'm just carrying on because I can't wait to finish this project, so if you're doing it, do give it time to rest and to dry out fully. I use the edging tool to mark all the way around it, and then the scissors to cut my shape out. As I've done this, I've lost a bit of the shape, but I could put it back on the mould to give it some more shape. I'm taking my tool with the sharp point, and I'm marking all around the edge of the bird as I'm going to stitch this together. Do you like my little trick for even spacing? Drawing on my thumbnail there, the gap, and then working around as we go. I took another scrap of leather and marked those holes through, and then taking the sharp point to push holes right the way through the leather. It's not the neatest of jobs, but all of this is by hand, and I'm absolutely loving how this has turned out. So I take my thread and I stitch it up as we did with the bag. Last minute I decided to add a little loop and a little wing. I added some toy stuffing inside to keep its shape, and used the scissors to cut the backing leather. So using some scrap leather and a simple technique of wetting the leather on a mould, I'm really pleased with the results this has given me. I wanted to make one of those leather cow keychains that you see all over the internet, so I drew myself a template and soaked the leather. I'm lucky enough to have a laser engraver, and so I wanted to try this small design on the laser. I imported my file, got it in place, I masking taped the leather up so that we don't get the stain on the leather, and set it to cut. I have an extractor on my laser engraver, so all those fumes are extracted, and the laser has cut my leather beautifully crisply. Now when it comes to leathercraft, is this cheating? That is the question. Well, yet again, it's another tool, it's something we can use to create things, so for me that's what it's all about. I know everyone doesn't have access to a laser, but I wanted to show you what this is capable of. This could be really carefully cut out with the scissors or the scalpel as well. I add a ring, a D-ring and a couple of stitches, and I love the finished result. So I made a bag and some small items. I'd now also like to make a wallet. So I've drawn out this design in Adobe Illustrator, and I'm also going to cut this out on my laser. This time adding some stitch holes, as I really want to see how that works with the laser. It looks to be working really well so far, but truth will tell when we come to stitching up the project. If you like these laser projects, I do go into more detail about the projects in some of my other videos. Just in case you wanted it, the link for this laser is also in the description below the video. It's an amazing machine and I have so many uses for it. I absolutely love it. I got a really lovely clean cut on this leather. I'm just knocking out all the little bits out of the holes and remove the masking tape. It fits together lovely, so now I'm going to stitch it together. First of all trimming the edges, but as it's a bit damp it doesn't work as easily. Stitching a saddle stitch as we did before, and it's really coming together and it's really quite easy for that needle to fit through. I made the holes just 1 millimeter in diameter and 3 millimeters apart. Instead of the laser, the leather can be cut with a scalpel or the scissors and then add the little holes in. When hand making leather, holes are normally added using metal punch tools like these. And if you shop around, they don't seem too expensive either. So in a short space of time, I've managed to have a go at lots of different leather crafting projects and make a decision whether I want to carry on and buy more tools or just use the basics and make some simple projects. So I hope this video has inspired you to have a go at leather crafting. Please take a look at all the links in the description below. I've definitely enjoyed it, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next creative video.